My name is Troy Hedrick. I am a representative here, representing a portion of Burlington. And my role really is to just kind of get us started. And I'm a big believer in the power of mindfulness and the power of deliberateness, the power of breath. And I know that there is a lot of emotion in the room, and that emotion resides on a pretty significant and broad continuum, anywhere from just curiosity to tentativeness to worry to frustration and to anger, certainly. And I just want to acknowledge that I know that that is in the room, and those are all valid emotions. And it's never my intention to tell anybody how they should feel, but I do like to be mindful about when those feelings show up. So I'm going to invite you, for those who might be comfortable, to just sit comfortably. Plant your feet on the floor. Stand comfortably with your feet and shoulders width apart, anything that's comfortable. And to just feel this ground supporting you. Kind of look ahead, close your eyes if you like. Rest your hands gently in your lap. Relax your shoulders. Let that gaze soften. And again, close your eyes if you feel so moved or it feels comfortable. And bring your attention to your breathing. Just notice it. Don't change it, just notice it. Notice the air as it moves through your nose and out. Feel the rise and the fall of your chest or your belly. If your mind starts to wander back to those emotions, that's okay. Gently bring it back to your breath. Imagine that breath like a wave. It comes in, it rises, it flows out, and as it flows out, it leaves a sense of calm in its way. Now let's focus on slowing our breath. I'm going to have us inhale on a count of 4. I'm going to have us hold that breath for a count of 4. I'm going to have you exhale slowly to a count of 6. And then we're going to pause. So in, hold, slow exhale, in, hold, slow exhale. And just repeat that. And keep your focus on that breath, on that deliberate, on that slow breath. And shift your focus inward. Notice the sensations in your body. Maybe there's a tightness, maybe there's a warmth, maybe there's a flutter in your chest. Notice any emotions that are present. Don't push them away. You don't have to try to name them, just let them be. Imagine you're observing these sensations and emotions as if they were clouds passing by. Give them permission to be there. Whatever you're feeling, calm, tense, something else entirely, that's all okay. Our goal is not to judge or change these feelings, but to notice them and to let them flow. One more deep breath in. Hold. Release. As we finish, bring your attention back to that breath. Wiggle your fingers or your toes to reconnect with your body. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and lift your gaze. Take a moment to thank yourself for creating this space to breathe and to reflect. Let's carry this awareness with us as we move into this discussion, staying open and mindful of our reactions without judgment. Thank you all for being here, and I mean that sincerely. I want to talk just very briefly about my intention for gathering this collection of guests. I'm a strong proponent of restorative practices, and my restorative practice is grounded really in 3 questions.
I can't hear you.
My practice of restorative justice is grounded really in 3 questions. Rethinking at the time of the incident. We're not going to spend a lot of time there today, and I was not here for most of the conversation that precedes this night. What we can think about as legislators especially, what were we thinking at the time of our decisions or our predecessors' decisions? What have you thought about since? That's the second question. That is where we are today. What have we learned since? That's really, really important when we do restorative work and what needs to happen for repair to continue. What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? What have you learned since? And how can repair happen? That's really at the core of why I decided to welcome our guests to this building today. And I'm going to hand this off. And I think we're starting with a song. So I'm going to let them do that. And then we'll proceed through with the different presentations. We are going to have questions afterwards. And I'm going to have a mic and I'll walk around. I'm going to probably start with the legislators and then questions from other folks. For press, we're going to hang out afterwards. If you want to talk more deliberately with our guests, that would be fine.
Good day, everyone. My name is Daniel Nolet. I'm the Executive Director of the Odanak First Nations Bank Council. I'm going to read today the statement that Chief Rick Wamson wanted me to say. Unfortunately, the Chief of Wamson cannot be here today. He's out in the west coast of British Columbia at the National Chiefs meeting at the AFN, Assembly of First Nations. So here's his statement, his word. First and foremost, thank you, you all, for attending this important meeting and taking the time to listen to us. Kolipayan Momanakik Ndakina means welcome to our territory. Oleone to Representative Troy Hedrick for giving us the opportunity to be heard. I appreciate you taking the lead within the State House. As many of you know, the Taobak, meaning Lake Champlain, is a historical landmark for us. It is the place of our birth. The origins of the Abenaki Nation permeate these surroundings. Since time immemorial, what is now called the state of Vermont has been part of the Indakina, our unceded territory. We continue to trace and honor these lands as the place where our ancestors formed our legacy, as we continue to restore our history told by the traces of their stories. As Chief of the Abenaki First Nation in Odanak, protecting the legacy of our ancestors is a duty driven by the necessity to make right the wrongs in telling our history. We have to keep in mind that we have a responsibility towards the next 7 generations to protect and restore our rightful heritage. They need to heal the shame imposed by a history that discounted the value of our people's history and worldview. They need to know about the courage and resilience of their ancestors, and that is the blood that flows in through their hearts. I would like to apologize for not being able to attend today's meeting. With the major changes in our world right now, I'm in Western Canada dealing with critical issues affecting us in current times. However, my absence does not mean that this meeting is less important. I'm sure that our councillors, Jacques Watso and Florence Benedict, and our director, myself, Daniel Nolet, his assistant director, Suzy Wongsuwin, and our invested future leaders, Sigouanis Lachapelle and Isaac Gil Lachapelle, will represent us efficiently. They will lead this discussion with their heart in a respectful way. Respect being one of our core values as Abenaki people. I invite you all to meet in a like-minded way. I would like to thank Professor Darrell LaRue, Richard Wayne, and Professor Devil Nassau for participating in today's discussion. I'm sure that they will provide valuable information to consider in the recognition process of 4 groups in Vermont. As Chief, having been involved in politics for much of my life, but in office for the last 15 years, I'm understanding the challenges of ancestry and recognition. Sometimes in politics, we can be misled, having to make decisions without always knowing all of the facts and consequences of these decisions. Politics requires us to have the courage and humility to rethink and repair the faulty system in which we can create damaging experiences for the people we serve. In the words of Maya Angelou, when we know better, we can do better. Finally, I urge you all to open your minds and hearts, listen to our voices, and ask yourself, what if we got it all wrong? In peace and friendship, Chief Rick Wamson.
Ouais, bonjour, messieurs, dames. My name is Jacques Watso. I'm an elected official since 2005 at the Odanak Band Council. I'm here on behalf of Odanak and Wadinak, representing 4,000 band members, full support of Chief and Council of Odanak. Wallinac and the Quebec Native Women Association, which represents 11 nations in the province of Quebec. I wrote down my speech there, so I won't forget anything. So I will be reading this speech, and as you may know, some of you like me, some of you don't, but I'm here just to speak out of my heart. So here goes my speech, and I hope you receive my information, and it's up for debate at the end. If you want to have questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them and open this dialogue with all of you present. The address by the official speech. Ladies and gentlemen, legislators, researchers, and participants. First, I would like to thank the Vermont State House for hosting us today for this essential dialogue, which we hope will lead to significant changes. We are gathered here at a crucial moment in an occasion we consider historic, to initiate a genuine process of reconciliation between the Benaki Nation and the state of Vermont. This moment of exchange should allow us to reflect on issues of cultural appropriation and the recognition of our history and rights as Indigenous people. However, it is important to emphasize that we are not here to blame the legislature of Vermont. We were not wrong. You were not wrong. Rather, you were misled. Individuals and groups without legitimacy have manipulated history, told falsehood, and taken advantage of the lack of rigorous verification to obtain recognition that does not belong to them. It is time to correct the error and ensure that only true Benaki, whose history and identity are authentic and recognized. The historical context. For over 400 years, First Nations have coexisted with non-Indigenous people in North America. The massive arrival of Loyalists and British settlers gradually pushed our people northward to the current limits of Odanak and in our northern territory. The Canadian Confederation introduced the concept of reservations, that we call reserves in Canada, confining us to a territory of only 6 square kilometers, which is roughly 4 square miles. This restriction was reinforced by the implementation of the Indian Act, which is still in force, which has had profound repercussion in Canada. This possession of our land, culture, and language, a residential school system aimed at killing the Indian in the child, the stigmatization and discrimination of Indigenous people, making our identity shameful. Transmission of this shame from one generation to the next, perpetuating a cycle of dependency and marginalization. Today, we are trying to break this cycle by reclaiming our culture, the knowledge, and the pride as a Benaki. The identity theft in Quebec. For the past 30 years, we have witnessed a troubling phenomenon, individuals claiming Indigenous identity based solely on a distant ancestor. However, having an Indigenous forebear of 12 to 13 generations ago does not mean understanding, living, transmitting Indigenous reality. In the province of Quebec, in 1645, the first recorded marriage between a Frenchman and a Algonquin took place. Today, 15 generations later, Marie Sylvestre Métabitowicz has approximately 2 million descendants. This genealogical reality is exploited to fabricate and idealize Indigenous identity while avoiding the suffering and consequences of colonial history. Individuals and groups unduly benefit from rights and opportunity reserved for Indigenous people by self-identifying as Indigenous without having an historical or cultural experience. The creation of opportunistic groups such as the Quebec Native Alliance in the province of Quebec has led to the distortion of our history and has been used to justify the racism against true Indigenous people. In the state of Vermont, a situation is similar. Since the 70s. A movement inspired by the esoteric beliefs has led to folklorization of Indigenous spirituality. A large part of Vermont population being of French-Canadian descent, some have preferred to claim and idealize a Benaki identity rather than assume their colonial past. This movement has structured itself to the point where illegitimate groups have obtained official recognition. However, in 2005, when they went for federal recognition, these groups could not prove their indigenous ancestry. Out of thousands of members, only 19 were actual Abenaki descents, and they were direct linked to us in Odanak. Despite these facts, the state of Vermont has granted official recognition in 2011 and 2012 to the 4 groups in Vermont, refusing to listen to the true Abenaki of Odanak. For nearly 30 years now, we have been fighting to have these fraudulent recognition annulled in the province of Quebec and New England. Consequences of the erroneous decisions. The consequences of these undue recognition are severe and directly affect our people. The version of our heritage, our archaeological artifacts are entrusted to illegitimate groups, a historical and cultural aberration. Institutionalized fraud, American taxpayer fund groups that are not indigenous. Manipulation of history. Vermont school criteria are rewritten without our consent, perpetuating a false view of our identity and heritage. This injustice weighs heavily on our nation and complicates our struggle for the true recognition of our people. A call, I'm almost done, so don't worry. A call for reconciliation and justice. Today we ask the legislator of Vermont to acknowledge this historical error and correct it. It is essential that the issue of recognizing indigenous groups be re-evaluated with rigor and honesty. In 2024, we brought this issue to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where we found that this phenomenon of identity theft is global. This is not a local issue, but a global problem that threatens true indigenous people. We therefore make a clear call. It is time to stop idealizing an indigenous identity disconnected from its historical and cultural reality. It is time to recognize those who have always been here, whose history, culture, and existence are not threatened by this appropriation. And it's time to build a reconciliation based on the truth and mutual respect. Merci beaucoup.
Greeting everyone, my name is Susie Obamsamin. Actually, after those 2 statements, I wanted to provide more information on how we see the territory, and that explains actually why we are here today. So, I know it's going to be quite small, but we have like copies of the map. So one of the main things that you have to understand on that map is that there is no Canadian-American border. This is like something artificial on our territory. It was imposed on us. We never gave consent on that border. And it's also explaining that there is no Canadian Abenaki nor American Abenaki. They are only Abenaki. This is really important because once you see this map, this is how we connect to the territory. This is how our own worldview is actually based on. So on the northern shore, I don't think I can show, no, it doesn't show, but on the northern shore, you see the St. Lawrence River. Really at the top is where it is located, Odanak and Wodanak. And on that map, you see all the routes that were taken actually on the territory to connect from north to south. I don't think there are enough copies, but if people want to, you can actually send them by email if you want to. So it's really important to see that there is a connection from north to south, on the Antakina. And just like for the story, for about 10 years, there were archaeological diggings that happened in Odanak, and actually Sigwanis and Isaac were younger back then, and they were assistants during that project, and they encountered like thousands and thousands of artifacts, and those artifacts were analyzed. Some of them were radiocarbon tested from 4 to 5,000 years old. But most importantly, the analysis that were done actually made us connect that site to other sites on the territory as well. So in the Connecticut Valley, the Champlain Valley, those sites are all culturally related. And when we say that, because they could find that it was the same tool, the technique that were used to make those tools were the same, the diet was the same. So it's really connecting, and it just means that that territory is Abenaki territory. There, on that map, you see also like overlaps from other First Nations and tribes. Those overlaps are still recognized today. So our brothers like Penobscot and Passamaquoddy, they recognize those limits on the territory. The same for the Mohawk Nation. So these knowledge of the territory, the overlaps on the knowledge of the different people that you are actually, when we talk to people in on the Penobscot side, like they know that we connect in the territory, we share some portion of the territory together and the resources that are on that territory as well. Wanted to say like that, I really actually like that map, I did not mention it, but it is in the hall of the Abenaki Museum in Odanak. If you never visited, just come. This is the first museum, Indigenous museum in Quebec, and we are really proud of it. It has been open for more than 50 years now, so just a really great place to go. Sorry, I keep touching the screen apparently. So it's also important to mention that we never stop moving on the territory, never stop connecting to that territory. And one of the key example of that connection is actually the basket making. So if you are not aware of it, Abenaki are basket makers. Actually, we are, according to the creation story, we were made out of black ash, and we have a close connection to the black ash, and doing baskets is still something really important in the nation. And you see on the, well, I guess it would be on your top, right? It's a basket that was made by a youth in Odanak, and she's really doing a great job making this art still alive. So the basket making industry actually was really active from 1870 to 1920. There were a lot of craft stores on the territory. So this is one of the pictures that you saw in other presentation that we've done over the past. That picture was taken in Highgate Spring around 1894. Why this picture is important? Because people from the nation were out there. They were living a good life, having a good income from selling crafts in really highly touristic places. So they were seen, they were given workshops, they were really just living their best life, I would say, because they were there for a lot of weeks, selling their craft, just connecting to their art, coming back to Odanak over winter time, and just going back and forth on the territory. So they were just moving. So that's one of the pictures. Second picture I wanted to show is actually a craft store that was owned by Alexandre Nolet. His craft store was located in Onguquit, Maine, was taken around 1930. So as you can see, well, it might be a little small, but it's written, Odanak shop, Indian, Abenaki Indian. So they were not hiding, they were really just there with everybody. Like it was just shown, it was written all over the place. These are only two pictures, but if you just look a little bit, search for the history of the nation, you'll encounter a lot of pictures, archives that actually show that. Like they were just being active on the territory, coming back and forth, telling stories, just being together. People were sitting in the same places, having stories and all that. So this is really important to understand that people were really there being Abenaki. And we never actually ceased to be Abenaki and be out there. And I know Daryl is going to touch base on genealogy, but I wanted to share that these are principal family names of Odanak Abenaki, and most of those family names, well, they are, not most of them I would say, but quite a few of them, like Sodocus, Avamsagan, Watso, Benedict, Ronald, Panetti, Dagonza, Gil, Hannes, are still Abenaki names that we are using right now too. So we have family lineage that is really easy to trace. And it's important to mention that because if you're claiming to be Abenaki, you have to make sure that you actually get tied to the families that were their historic place. And on that, I wanted to share the mic to Daryl, so thank you so much. Allow me.
I was just going to take a moment to invite some of the people who are standing. I can see at least 4 or 5 seats over on this side, if anyone would like to take a seat. There's also a couple seats here at the table. There's another one there at the table. Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. A little bit more comfortable. So I'm Daryl. Thanks to everyone for being here, the legislators, to Troy for organizing this event, and people from Odanak from coming, both from Odanak First Nation, but also from New York State, where there are several hundred people from Odanak who live. And also from Vermont, where there are also people connected to Odanak who live. And so, yeah, I generally research issues around false claims to Indigenous identity, particularly among French descendants, or those who descend from the first French-Canadian or French colonizers in New France. I'm one of those people. Both my parents are French-Canadian, and through that genealogy, like the large majority of French Canadians and also Franco-Americans, I can trace Indigenous ancestors. Like Jacques said, there are about 10 million Canadians who could do so. Usually a handful of women born in the early 1600s. I'm related to 3 of those Indigenous women. That doesn't make us Indigenous today. Celine Dion, as you call her, I call her Celine Dion. But she's one of those women. She has a Mi'kmaq ancestor. Many hockey players who you've probably heard of also have Indigenous ancestry back from the 1600s. It's about 2 to 3 million Americans who also have that ancestry. Again, it does not make any of them Indigenous. All right, so I'm going to get going here. So there's a long history of playing Indian in the United States, also in Canada. But since the 1970s in particular, there's been an increasing number of white Americans who've been claiming that they're Native American. This plays out in the census, it plays out in the creation of new organizations, and all kinds of different facets in sort of academic literature on the topic. Some academics call it playing Indian, like Philip Deloria Jr. Some academics call it race shifting, self-indigenization, or pretending is unborn. As an example, there was an exponential increase in the number of persons identifying as Native American in the U.S. Census between 1960 and 2020. We really see the change happen in 1970. That's when the increase really sort of starts to take off, like I mentioned, to the point where there's about 10 million people now in the U.S. who are saying they're Native American, whereas in 1960 there was 550,000. And that number has stayed relatively stable from the time censuses were first started being taken in the 1830s. So something here is happening in terms of how people are changing their identities. It's not that there's an increase in births. That's not at all what's happening. It's that adults are changing their identity.
Also, they didn't allow you to put it down.
So in terms of family lore, there are also, one of the reasons, I should say, for this movement in particular is that there's an increasing number of big tribes that rely specifically on family lore. Ideas sometimes around long ago ancestry, but not always about ancestry. Sometimes they're just stories where people want to shift out of the white identity and claim some sort of marginal identity because it gives them something politically or socially. What's very clear, though, is that Native American tribes in the United States have been clear they oppose self-identification as the basis of identity. So self-identifying itself doesn't actually, shouldn't be the basis, checking the box. It should be something that is the decision of Native Americans if you're making a claim to their identity. And another important thing is that Indigenous identity is not simply about the life, but about social and political forms of belonging. So again, relying on some blood relation from 12 generations ago is not quite cutting. So the case of Vermont, the Abenaki movement in Vermont got started in the 1970s. They failed at their effort to gain federal recognition in 2006. They actually filed their petition for federal recognition in 1982. That was a group based in Swanton. In 2003, the state of Vermont actually opposed their petition for recognition. And you can see I put the title page here of the report. The report was quite detailed. It was done by the Attorney General's office. It was submitted to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In particular, there's their federal recognition process office. And the primary, or at least one of the primary reasons they were denied was because they didn't demonstrate they were descendants of Abenaki people. And that still is the case today, even though they've been state recognized.
That's a lie.
So there are 4 Abenaki tribes who received state recognition in 2011 and 2012, after more than 30 years of trying. So they were first recognized by a governor of Vermont in 1978, and that was rescinded. And eventually they failed at state recognition. The state of Vermont took a position against them. And then in 2011 and 12, there was this new process that was developed. My research, which I published, and I'll show you the sort of paper in a few minutes, it basically shows that that the members of these groups don't descend, actually have no Abenaki ancestry. They descend primarily from French-Canadian immigrants to Vermont circa 1810 to 1880. You probably are aware of that movement of people, the immigration of Quebecois people into Vermont and later into New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts. But that movement started in the 1810s, specifically in Vermont, and it was people basically from just north of the border in what is called the Richelieu Valley in Quebec who were immigrating to Vermont, oftentimes for working as farmhands, etc., etc. So really there are, these are not actual Abenaki tribes, but they're actually treated as such under Vermont law. So the state recognition process was deeply flawed. The conflicts of interest were endemic, and I think this is why we're inviting legislators to this event to actually have a conversation about the process itself. Vermont's not the only state where there's been a recognition process that essentially recognized non-Indigenous people. I'll explain that in a few minutes. But the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs oversaw the process and included almost exclusively leaders, members, and former employees of the groups seeking recognition. None recused themselves from overseeing their own group's application, which often involved dozens of extended family members. No genealogical verification of Abenaki ancestors was needed. Instead, it verified the process. People had kinship connections. So people were related, they had ancestors who were related, but not that those ancestors were Abenaki. And so this was written into the law that was passed by the State House. And that was one of the fundamental flaws of this process. So this is why you have individuals now who say they're Abenaki and are recognized as such, but actually have no Abenaki ancestry whatsoever. Leading group members selected the reviewers. So one of the leading group members, who became a chief, quote unquote, later on. 6 out of the 7 of the reviewers, and you can access this, I access the files through requests for public information, you can get this yourself as well. 6 out of the 7 had a long demonstrable history of employment with one of the groups, and this was presented in their own biographies to the BC NNA. So you have people here who are reviewing it who actually worked for the groups. So these are some of the conflicts of interest that I think really mean that the process itself is fatally flawed. Groups gain state recognition, this is what the academic literature tells us, only in states with no federally recognized Native American tribes. So if this happens, the state recognition process, it usually happens in states with no federally recognized tribes because there's not really any Native American opposition to this. For example, a similar effort in Maine in the 2000s failed. This effort in Maine was based pretty much on the same sort of stories, etc., as the groups here in Vermont. So these were Franco-Americans who had immigrated to Maine. But that effort, which was at the State House, but it was sort of voted down right before it was actually voted in the state, or sorry, it was removed from, the bill was removed right before it was going to get voted on because the 4 federally recognized tribes vocally opposed this bill. And for several years, this one group, which I write about in my article, had some form of recognition in Maine, but they didn't get state recognized because of this opposition. Another example here is the governor of Tennessee recognized a tribe in 1978 who was saying they were Cherokee. That was rescinded in 1991. 6 groups were later granted state recognition in 2010, but it was overturned by a judge because of violation of state open meetings law. So what happened was the actual state Native American Commission was populated entirely by members of the groups that wanted recognition. And they had a closed meeting and decided that they were going to give themselves recognition. That was actually overturned, and the state of Tennessee didn't just overturn it, but they actually disbanded the Committee on Native American Affairs in the state. So like I said, this isn't something that's unique to Vermont, it's something that's happening in other states as well. So just to give you a sense of how I did this research, so in their documents, so this is actually data from the information that they have shared themselves. So this is the groups in Vermont who got recognition. They used 20 primary families, so what I'm calling root ancestors from the 1800s. This is in the 1982 petition for federal recognition, the 1986 amendment, the 1995 amendment, and then the 2005 amendment. So they had 4 different documents. One of the interesting things is they kind of shifted. In the 1982 document, they said there's 15 families that existed in the 1800s who are Abenaki. In the 86 document, they said there were 200 to 300. So it went from 15 families to 200 to 300 families. Then in 1995, they settled on 20. So this is why I'm going with this figure of 20. And so I verified one of the families. It's the most common family in terms of what they presented in 2005. In 2005, what they did is they tied each one of their members, there's over 1,000 at this point, to one of these root ancestors. So this was the one that was the most common, the Saint Laurent family. And the root ancestors are these 2 individuals, a man named Hippolyte and a woman named Elizabeth. And so you can actually do this yourself if you like, but you can go to the, just trying to translate it in my head, but the research program in historical demography at the University of Montreal. What they've been doing for over 50 years is digitizing and creating files for all of the vital records that existed from New France on. So essentially from 1621, the moment that the first European as a girl was born in New France, all the way till 1850 is where they're up to now. So for a period of about 9 generations. So the Saint Laurent family is in this database. You can access it for free. Like I said, it's a university project. It's very reliable. And so this is the baptism certificate. These are the files that they create to make them more legible. I'll show you what the actual original looks like in a moment and why I'm showing you this one. So this is the baptism for Hippolyte. You can see here it lists his parents, Philip and Marie Agathe. This is the marriage for Hippolyte and Marie Elisabeth. These are their parents. From this point on, you can just go back all the way to the early 1600s and trace all of their ancestors. And so this Saint Laurent family has no Abenaki ancestors. It has no indigenous ancestors. People who are relying on this line, according to the documents filed by these groups, have no indigenous ancestry. And yet here they are being recognized as Abenaki in Vermont. These are the original documents. This is why I didn't just post these. Once you're on this website, you can actually link through Family Search to these original documents. So here it is written out in French. This is the baptismal certificate right here. This is the marriage certificate. I'm not going to read it out. It's in French, and it's also somewhat difficult to read. But this is what the project that I'm referring to do. They go through these and they transcribe them, and they make these files available digitally. You can go check out the originals to verify. So I did that with all the files, double checked them, made sure that everyone who's listed in these documents was actually who was in the files. I'm giving the example here of Homer St. Francis. Some of you have probably heard of him. He was the sort of one of the people who inaugurated the first so-called Abenaki group in Swanton in Vermont. So he was related to 5 of the 20 primary families. So I did his complete genealogy. You can see that he has no indigenous ancestors whatsoever, according to a free public database that has millions of files on French Canadian ancestry. And this is partly what I was explaining earlier. Because of this individual would be related to multiple people in the community. He's related to 5 of these primary families. Some people are only related to 1. Right? But because they're related, that's all it took in the state recognition process, then somehow that helped them pass and get recognition, even though they're not related to Abenaki people. Okay, and so since these are some of the claims that I heard last time I was here last spring, when there was an event at the University of Vermont, so I just wanted to kind of debunk some of the claims that are circulating. The Abenakis did not all move to Canada, some stayed behind. As Jacques was saying, I think Susie mentioned this, Abenaki people fled to the safety of Odanak by 1800s, that's in the historical record. They returned across the border at different times, like Susie pointed out. There's a long record, including in Vermont publications, of Abenaki people present in Vermont and in New Hampshire and in Maine, who are all connected to Odanak. And some continue to live in the state of Vermont, yes, but also New York State and other areas of New England. But they've stayed connected to Odanak as a home base. Another claim I've heard is over time we mixed with European settlers, that so did the ones who ended up at Odanak. Why aren't we asking for their genealogies? Mixing isn't the problem. No one's making a blood quantum argument. It's that members of Vermont tribes have no Abenaki ancestry at all. That's the issue. None. The people at Odanak are all related to Abenaki people who lived in the 20th century. They are the Abenaki people. Claim 3. Odanak doesn't see us as related to them because we aren't related to their families. We have our own families who stayed here. This is false. There's no way that people at Odanak weren't aware of the existence of hundreds of Abenaki people living in their territory for almost 200 years. In terms of people who study Indigenous people, that's an impossibility. Think about the fact that people are actually facing genocidal violence. They look for their family for survival. And the people at Odanak would have known that their actual ancestors and their living relatives were alive, and they would have connected with them, especially considering how close they were. Claim 4. Census and vital records aren't reliable because they weren't looking to establish Indigenous identity. The only people they recognized as Indian were those connected to reservations. Again, that's not true. There are some cases where that is the case throughout the United States and even in Canada. But census and vital records, as well as local histories and newspapers, regularly documented Native Americans in Vermont, Abenaki people, but also other people. As when I was doing this research, from the 1830 census on, there were always Native Americans identified in Vermont.
Yeah,
There wasn't one census that
If
was
the
really
man was
more,
at a household, they were counted.
including Abenaki people with ties to Odanak. They don't document the forebears of today's tribes as Native American Abenaki because they weren't. They were French Canadians and are always documented as such. Well, we have our oral traditions. Our ancestors hid their identities for good reasons, but maintain traditions. What they have is family lore. Ancestors often mistake the truth to hide reality from descendants, sometimes because of shame or other reasons. People in the present also remember what suits their political and social desires today.
Yeah, no, we know.
Odanak accepted us in the past, but now have turned against us. Some people at Odanak were close with the so-called tribes in the past without knowing the basis of their claims, but the Odanak leadership has been firmly against their claims since at least 2003. Our critics at Odanak and UVM are funded by Hydro-Quebec or other corporate interests. I even heard this circulating in the room today when I sat down.
That's true.
This is a conspiracy theory. The opposition is based on knowledge about the origins of the tribal claims.
I want to acknowledge that there are many feelings of anger. I know that they're in the room. I know that.
You can't let lies just be said, that's what happened.
Come down across, a foreigner come down
Lies happen.
in tough life.
I'm going
My
to ask-
family was born into Jesuit.
I'm going to ask,
And you must have missed that or you ignored it. I got paperwork,
sir,
and it's from you.
I'm going to ask that we let the presentation happen. We absolutely will be taking questions at the end. I just want to remind folks that I'm going to start with legislators. But if you could please hold your comments and your questions till the end, we will most certainly give you an arena for those comments and questions. I do want to respect our guests. Thank you.
So these Vermont, quote-unquote, Abenaki tribes are now entrusted with human remains for burial, receive funding for social programs, rewrite education curriculum, run the state's commission on Native American affairs, produce and market Native American art, receive free lifetime hunting and fishing licenses, and receive property tax exemptions on their offices and buildings,
That's what you want.
This is the paper that I wrote. State recognition of the dangers of race shifting in the case of Vermont. You can easily access it online. It's open source. If you want to talk with me afterwards, I'd be more than happy to do that. Here's my email address. I think I'm done.
One of these last meeting here is called. That one.
You're a tech person in the room who can.
Good other questions.
Cable is plugged in with the slides.
They're on listening to the unheard voices. Yeah, she supposed you we weren't allowed to speak. Us got unheard voices.
Thank you, Troy. My name is Dave Massell. Thank you. Thank you for coming today. I've taught and researched history at UVM since 1997. I helped organize the public forums on this issue at UVM across the last 30 years. Some of you may have read my recent editorial. It was 4 years ago this month that I was asked by an academic journal editor to review Darrell LaRue's article manuscript on race shifting in Vermont. Peer review of scholarship, content, and methods is a standard obligation of university faculty. Given my specialization in Canadian American and Indigenous history, I agreed. At that time, I still took on faith that Vermont state recognized Abenaki were in fact Abenaki, and that the story that has gripped our state for a generation was grounded in evidence, that our Abenaki were in hiding to avoid persecution and only reemerged publicly as Abenaki in the 1970s. Over the past 27 years, I have brought students to learn from and about the region's native communities, Cree, Northern Quebec, the Mohawk and Akwesasne, as well as Odanak First Nation, the Abenaki. Among the courses I teach is a seminar called The Invented Indian. The course traces a 500-year phenomenon in which Euro-American settlers have spun and shaped the image of the Indian for their own purposes in literature, art, commerce, summer camps, film, and so on. This is what Robert Burkhoff, a historian, calls the white man's Indian. It is the last and latest phase of this history that Darrell has just described, in which white people claim to be indigenous. So while I was initially unsettled by Darrell's findings, I was also determined to carry out the due diligence required to get this history right. And that's what I did. In collaboration with colleagues at UVM and beyond, including grad students, we combed the historical record, scholarship, Abenaki history and anthropology, records of the eugenics movement, a century of newspaper accounts, the minutes and recordings of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, conversations with Vermonters who participated in recognition,
genealogies galore, and so on. We also reached out to the Abenaki themselves at Odanak. What did they know? When did they know it? And how did they feel? This inquiry spawned those 3 public forums at UVM beginning April 22 with Beyond Borders 2022. Those forums, in turn, prompted investigations by Vermont Public, VTD, New Hampshire Public Radio, and others. That have begun to bring this issue so recently in the shadows and very much taboo in Vermont into the light. Why did I do this? Why did I engage in this work?
How do you collect money?
It is not, thanks for the cue, it is not because I'm on the payroll of Hydro-Quebec. I am not. That is a conspiracy theory. It was floated in the summer of 2022.
Documents.
Floated in the summer of 2022, just after Odanak spoke and I moderated, intended to tarnish me and distract journalists from doing their jobs. And it's nasty, as well as dishonest. I engaged this work because it was and remains my job to explore the historical record with colleagues and students and to share what I find there, regardless of how inconvenient those findings might be. I engaged in this work because I have the obligation and the privilege to do so as a professional, tenured historian at UVM, which means that I can and I must facilitate evidence-based conversations, even challenging ones. And I engaged in this work because as a Vermont citizen, I believe that our laws should be grounded in evidence, in historical reality, and not in conjecture, family lore, wishful thinking, or myth. In fact, no scholar, no one, has shared credible evidence that a community of Abenaki remained in Vermont after 1800. That is a myth. Vermont's early settlers coercively removed the Abenaki from what is now Vermont by 1800. That is Indian removal, not at gunpoint, but under pressure of white settlement. Removal occurred on a spectrum. The Abenaki retreated to the northern portion of their ancestral territory, map on the left, which is now Quebec. They continued to visit the larger territory, as we've heard, photo on the right. And in the early 20th century, many migrated to the United States in search of work, which is how we get an Abenaki family settled in Newport, another in Charlotte. It was between 2010 and 2012 that our legislature, Vermont's legislature, decided who is Abenaki, albeit without evidence, without requiring evidence of Abenaki ancestry. And so ended up recognizing people who may well believe they are Abenaki. I don't doubt that, I don't judge that. Humans tell stories and humans come to believe in those stories.
Like the one you're talking about.
But that does not make it so. And all the while, that political process marginalized the Abenaki themselves. No one of Abenaki descent on the recommended commission. Odanak's elected leadership not permitted to give direct testimony. And state recognition laws passed over the strenuous objections of our region's indigenous people. Marginalization is described vividly, painfully, in a recent editorial by Abenaki Tyndall Bruer of Newport.
He testified during the process.
Why might legislators take this issue seriously? There are multiple reasons, and here are my top two to close.
We have one video.
First, costs. State recognition created what is, in effect, a special class of Vermont citizens who happen to be largely of Franco-American descent. And 14 years on, the benefits are cascading, a growing list of privileges and tax benefits, state and federal. Remember, there are tens and tens of thousands of Vermonters of Franco-American descent who do not receive those benefits. As a Vermont citizen, I don't think that's fair or justifiable. This is money, real money, chasing a myth when we are facing real and pressing financial needs, which you all, legislators, are well aware.
You said right there, follow the money. That's all it is.
Second reason, ethics. And I'll quote, for those who stand for social justice, the harm to Native people is real and clear, as we have heard. Vermont's actions of Indian exclusion, making a policy about Indigenous people without their consent.
That's the issue of this country.
That is old-fashioned colonialism. And it violates multiple articles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the global guidebook, if you will, adopted by the General Assembly in 2007, ratified by the United States in 2010. And those articles include the fundamental rights of self-determination. Those articles include the rights to control one's own heritage, including human remains. Those rights include the right to determine one's citizenship, 33, and they include Article 36, the right to participate in public discourse across international borders when those borders bisect Indigenous territory as they do here. So if we, as Vermonters, are interested in Indigenous justice, or if we as Vermonters are interested in equitable laws grounded in evidence, we have some work to do. Thank you for listening. Feel free to reach out.
Hello. My name is Richard Whitting. I'm a Vermonter and a historian whose research is focused on both modern Abenaki history and on the related subjects of eugenics, disability, and institutionalization in Vermont in the 20th century. Specifically, in my research, I have sought to accurately foreground the individuals who were sexually sterilized under Vermont's 1931 law titled An Act for Human Betterment by Voluntary Sterilization. People whose voices, I believe, still remain unheard. In the last 30 years, Abenaki history and eugenics history in Vermont has become retroactively entangled in a way that they were not in the past. I believe this is a second layer of us getting it wrong, which is distorted efforts to address harms done to victims of eugenics policies. Next slide. During this research, I began to question two of the many claims the state recognized groups began making in the late 80s about eugenics. First, that they had been in hiding from eugenicists, which is why they lacked documentation of their claimed Abenaki heritage. And second, that the eugenics movement in Vermont was a genocide focused on them as Abenaki people. These are contradictions. The eugenics movement began in the late 1800s, and the eugenics survey of Vermont was not established until 1925. So how can hiding from eugenicists explain the lack of documentations from the 1700s until these times? And if they were hiding in plain sight, as they claim, how were they also the targets of a public-facing sterilization program? And as Daryl has demonstrated here today, there is in fact no lack of documentation who their ancestors were. They were not Abenaki. Nor is there any lack of evidence about who eugenicists were targeting. They published books on the subject and were not shy about their prejudices. Nowhere do they discuss Abenaki.
Mercedes does in her book.
Reading better Vermonters.
These claims also contradict the fact that there were, are, and have always been Odanak-Abenaki families in Vermont, notably in Charlotte and Newport. They lived public lives, had good relations with their neighbors, and were not targeted by eugenicists. Evidence of this is easily found. Next slide. Additionally, in my research, I found that scholars of Vermont eugenics history, notably Nancy Gallagher and Mercedes de Guardiola, have chosen to also embrace these stories and repeat these unsubstantiated claims, for which they provide no evidence either.
Are they archives?
I have been there, thank you.
You've been the wrong ones then.
Yeah, talked to
There was a class last 2 weeks ago on that.
That's another way.
However, I couldn't feel confident about these conclusions without first doing my own research. So I began a 2-year process of analyzing the sterilization certificates from the 252 procedures performed under Vermont's 1931 law. There are 252 certificates that exist,
No more on it.
as they are the only existing evidence of state-sponsored sterilization program. I also built genealogies and biographies of the victims to better understand who they were as individuals. Here is what I learned about them. All were labeled as disabled, and many were living with actual disabilities. The majority were in state institutions, primarily the Vermont Industrial School and the Brandon School for feeble-minded children. Regarding gender, 68% were women who in this time were often institutionalized for charges of immorality, sexual deviance, adultery, or just judged to have too many children that the state was supporting. A portion were also young men detained for truancy or petty crimes. Geographically, these people came from all over the state and not from any one region or community. While 7 were residents of Franklin County, none were from the towns of Swanton or Highgate.
Yes. I was down there 2 weeks ago.
Perhaps most critically, nearly all of those sterilized were receiving some form of town core support. In summary, these sterilizations most often happened to people who lived with disabilities, struggled with poverty, and were socially marginalized. I did not find any that were Abenaki. Of those whose names are non-redacted, race and ethnicity did not appear to be a factor. This likely reflects the simple fact that Vermont was 99.8% white at this time. There was only one non-white person I found who was black. I also found that first and second generation immigrants were surprisingly underrepresented. Regarding those who now claim to be Vermont Abenaki, I can confirm that a number of their ancestors, along with thousands of other Vermonters, were recorded in the eugenics survey record. And among those sterilized, I found one person who had been operated on and tragically had died of complications from that operation. So what does this history matter? Recall that when the legislator apologized for eugenics, in the front row to receive that apology were the leaders of Vermont's 4 state-recognized tribes. When the legislator created a Truth and Reconciliation Commission at an estimated cost of $4.5 million, legislators made clear that such a commission was to study what compensation these tribes might receive for the alleged harms done to them during the eugenics era.
You know,
We are here today, I am almost done, we are here today discussing the question of what if we got it wrong, so far in terms of state recognition. To this, I would add these questions. What if we got it wrong about who was harmed by the state's eugenic policy practices? And if so, what if the state apologized to the wrong people? And what if the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, mandated to accommodate these erroneous conclusions, is now functionally incapable of finding the truth and therefore offering honest reconciliation?
Only you know the truth.
No, I just want to.
As former, last line here, as former UVM professor James Lowen, author of the books Lies My Teacher Told Me, once said, telling the truth about the past helps justice in the present. We have not been told the truth about the past. If we hope to get justice right for those who were harmed, we must change course and begin to make amends.
We want all of the truth.
And you think 436 of my family members are in this freaking eugenics survey. We're the Phillips family. And you're saying we're all idiots and imbeciles, that we weren't affected? That, I'm telling you, that is not, I am the leader of one of these tribes. And you're saying we're not affected? Not all 436 of my family members
I
were
said you were
idiots.
not sterilized as to the record. I will.
You're talking
I will answer
sterilization.
all these questions at the Q&A.
Many people were affected other than just being sterilized.
I agree. I agree.
This is coming from the UVM and these are not people.
How heartless is that?
They want to speak and they
Okay.
That's why we're saying that we weren't
We
affected.
will have time. I know.
You don't know.
there-
You don't know. They're saying that they're the victims.
They
Well,
are
come
going
here.
to speak and then we'll have questions.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Right now.
Pár, întâi o să-i zacă și belgă, al Albania, în oige o de nac. De sens catava eu în casă gata. Negawes, always a Patricia Chapel, Nokmes, Dolores Wonalet, ta Maham, Ernest Chapel. Metongus, Martin Gill, Nokmes, Ellen Gill, ta Maham, Michel Gill. The harm of self-proclaimed Abenaki goes beyond the individual level. It affects collective Wabanaki identity, our resources, and our rights. For us, the youth, the consequences are deeply left in terms of cultural loss, emotional strength, and diminished opportunities, as well as perpetrating a false narrative and distorting our history. They are replacing us by erasing us.
Pai, ndaj siguane sa chapelle, zdanon vai squa ta polebe, en wayo danak, nesenska tavan godons un cascanma, negawes alewezo Joan la chapelle, nokmes Dolores Ronalet, ta mahom Ernest la chapelle. En meton west alewezo Rodrigo Brinkhouse, nokmes Norma Brinkhouse, ta mahom Eduardo Brinkhouse. Combating this issue involves promoting education, raising awareness to a wider public as it guarantees the protection of our cultural activities, our language, and our traditions, as well as our identity. It also ensures that Wabanaki youth grow up feeling empowered, supported, and proud of their authentic cultural heritage. Wabanaki of Oldenak and Wollingnak are the sole guardians of Wabanaki identity. Oilne.
I am going to move us into comments and questions. We're going to start with legislators who may want any clarifying questions answered. I will also just ask that there are probably a number of people who want to provide a comment or ask a question, so if you can please keep them brief. I know there are a lot of feelings in the room. I know there is a lot of anger in the room, and that is fine. You get to have those feelings. I want us to couch this in respect. And I want to frame this as honest comments and questions. And again, I'm going to start with the legislators just to see if there are any.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Representative Hedrick, as well as everybody for being here. I think in an open society, it's important to talk simply about issues that we may disagree upon. That's why we're in this building. My question is for Dr. LaRue.
Have your name?
My name is Thomas Chittenden. I serve in the Vermont City. Dr. LaRue, you stated during the 70s, 80s, 90s there was a large number of recognition applications at the federal level. That was a time when there were many tribes across the country. Well, the question I'm going to have is, could you reflect on how many applications for recognition at the federal level were not approved, and what percentage what were?
I'm going to move the mic back and forth.
Thank you. Sorry, I think I'll reframe what I said. What I was actually talking about was how the original group in Swanton had made 4 different amendments. So there's the original one and 3 different amendments. So those were all the same application. So I wasn't referring to there being a lot of general federal recognition applications. I don't know offhand what the percentage of those who applied for federal recognition obtained federal recognition, but it is definitely less than 50%.
11%.
So,
It's
yeah.
not really evidence of it.
Next.
Are there other legislators who might have a comment or a question?
Yes, I do. My name is Leland
Let
Moore.
me bring the mic, Leland, okay?
Thank you. My name is Leland Morgan. I'm a state representative. And my concern is that our guests spent a good deal of time talking about their side. And it would seem to me that the opposition, so to speak, would have equal time to state their case. It seems that there are-
Thank you.
We're the unheard voices. It seems that there are a lot of people here with a lot of paperwork that I think they probably had the intention of speaking also, and I think they should be given that opportunity to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to speak to that, if you mind. I brought this together. This is and I did this because I feel the evidence is compelling and needs to be heard. I would encourage anybody who wants to provide a similar forum for anybody else might consider talking to their legislators to put that together.
Oh, we have.
But my intent really was to bring the ODNAC First Nation
Right.
But
to
the
the State
anger you
House.
keep talking about is because only one side keeps getting the microphone.
Right.
That's what we
You wanna
keep
be like
dealing
one
with.
of
It's
the
just
trustees of
one side
UVM?
gets the voice, and then we have to make everybody else calm their emotions because they have no voice.
And keep it quick.
Yeah.
Keep it quick.
That's right, don't talk too long.
My goal with this workshop was to give an arena to the
We've
ODNAC
already
First
had
Nation.
it at UVM for 3 years.
We're the ones without
Like, most people are not glad.
I would encourage those who feel they haven't been represented by a forum of their choosing to reach out to your legislator.
Oh, we
and
have.
see
You're
if they
with
want
us.
to put that
Our
together.
legislators are on our side.
It's our question.
This is
My name
our
is
time.
Denise, I'm an Abenaki, Denise Watso, here to speak. The groups here, and to the legislator, with all due respect, the groups that are here have had 30 years at the table, 30 years to have their voices heard and be in this, being vetted here in this, so they've had lots of time at the table, with all due respect. We have only had this time here
This is our.
in the last 3 years.
We pay for this.
The last 3 years.
We
We've
pay for
only
their
been allowed to
paychecks.
speak in the last
Our
3
tax
years.
dollars are paying for you to
Our,
be
their
here.
tax, the
Pass it
people
to-
in
pass it to our
Vermont
chiefs.
are paying for false groups that are not
Pass it-
Abenaki.
pass it
The
to somebody
evidence
that
is
can
clear,
see.
sir. The evidence is very
Your
clear.
evidence.
Let me state something very clearly. Let me state something very clearly. The land that we call Vermont is only called Vermont because the original territory was divided by a border through the colonial wars.
Oh, that was, we know that.
No, sir.
We took history.
We're well aware of that.
That does
You
not,
give that, you give them recognition, you should give our people
Oh, yeah.
recognition.
How to set here, we have no, we don't.
The state recognizes I'm happy about
that does not disconnect our guests, the Odanak First Nation, from this land.
They're your guests.
They are my guests.
We offered to
I have
sit with
access
them
to
and
this
they
room.
say yes and then they never follow
Okay.
through.
Lie.
No,
No,
not a lie.
I'm not going to
We've got to
continue this
agree.
if we're going to continue to talk over one
Yes, we
another.
have.
I'm just not going to continue this if we're going to continue to talk over one another. We have to do this respectfully.
Even start.
Troy, it won't work here.
Thanks, Troy. Representative Michael Morgan from Milton. I understand, all due respect, man, what you just said about only you've had the last 3 years, and that's fine, and not trying to pick a side here. However, since it has come to a more formal situation here. I think it's probably only fair that at some point you hear the Paul Harvey, the rest of the story from the other side. I do believe it's fair, and I understand some of the sentiment about who's had what for what time, but since it has come to this crescendo, I guess I would call it, depending where you sit on this, and again, I'm not picking sides, and I'm not attempting to do that. I'm not trying to drive away with anybody, but I think, again, I believe when we try to talk about, equity here in this building, I think it's fair that we give something to both sides of the conversation, and maybe that's
He doesn't see that.
Hi, I'm Representative Boston from Colchester, and I think most legislators know when I'm making a decision, listening to testimony, I'm looking for data. And I'm looking for evidence, yep. And so I think what would be helpful is not, just putting out opinions or emotions or whatever, but maybe having another forum possibly with your data, with your evidence. I don't know if that there will be an opportunity.
That's exactly what I was getting at, Sarita.
Yeah. So because I do think, there's lots of data and evidence on this side,
They didn't show evidence, they showed stuff on there. There's nothing, we have documents that are signed and sealed and delivered, that is true.
Yeah, whatever, I don't know how to kind of organize it, but, we would need data, evidence, records, whatever, to make a decision, to make an informed decision.
But that happened in 2010 and 2011. There was data.
That started in 1976.
That your own Vermont AG said no. That your own Department of Interior and the federal recognition process said 1%
All
of
the
people
federal
were
is
even
looking for is
applicant.
quantum.
So you were denied both, the final determination was denied both times.
Yeah.
Your own Vermont.
Your people signed this document in 1977, recognizing Chief Palmer, St. Francis. That's your people.
That's right.
Right here.
So it's this data or not there?
When we talk over one another, the communities that are listening online are unable to follow the conversation. I'm starting with the legislators.
And then we just said it was gonna go to us, so I thought.
I'm starting with the legislators, and when we talk over one another, the folks who are following along online are unable to follow the conversation. So if you want your voice to be heard, it's going to be very important that you do it one at a time. I know that I have 2 legislators in the queue, so I'm going to continue with them, and I do see your hand, sir.
Representative Steady, East Milton, Westward. I have friends that are part of the Abenaki tribe in Milton, and I think at this point, out of respect for both parties, that now we need to have the local Vermonters do the same with their data, because at this point, I think there's a lot of anger, and out of respect for both parties, I think at this point, we should organize our locals to do the same at the table.
Oh, you're not?
I don't know all the legislators. No, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to move around.
Bonjour, thank you for coming. I am not a member of the 4 recognized tribes. I served on the Vermont Commission for Native American Affairs from 2006 to 2010 to avoid what's happening here. And consequently, I self-identify as French-Canadian Canadian. The reason I want to talk to you is because you have some misconceptions. Between 2006 and 2010, Odanak was represented by 2 individuals that are citizens of your tribe. They were represented by Amy Brink and Tim Dunbar. And they were, we were asked when we were joined if we were okay to have Odanak representation. And we said yes.
Yep.
So for 4 years, they served us. On the last meeting that several of you have addressed, the presentation as to being formally recognized, Skip Bernier gave a 2-inch stack of paperwork to the commissioner, and Jeannie and Tim both spoke.
Yeah.
So there was 3 people who represented you there. And the person who talked about eugenics, yes, I would like to address some of the comments you said. I'm 71 years old. When I was in high school, my required reading was We Americans, The Cleavage of American City by Ellen Anderson, the assistant director of the eugenics program. And I read this, and I questioned everything in it. And the teacher told me, it's a textbook, you must believe it. So I went on to spend the next 50 some odd years of my life asking the elders in my life the stories, doing the research, day after day, going outside and vomiting after I read those records. Every day was upsetting. And to say they were all identified as delinquent, dependent, and disability. It was only a catchphrase they used across the country to put these people in. This was not true. 623 people in my family were institutionalized. 623. That is a lot of people. And so I speak every day about this because I'm here because they suffered for me. And I bring elders, 80, 90-year-olds around in tours with younger kids for them to tell the stories. And the stories they tell of survival do not match what you just said. Let me give you an example. The first 1,000 people that were recorded in the eugenics records came from prison. They came from prison. All 44 boxes of the eugenics records, which I have read every one of them, there are 82 families. Of the 82 families, 5 are intermarried, 5 say Indian blood or mixed blood. Never once in all 44 boxes does it say the word Vidinki, but it is implied.
Yeah.
It is implied. And if you miss that, you missed a lot when you studied it.
And I believe Kim Delaware was removed
Wait,
by
It's not your time.
Council, you keep interrupting, I am making a point.
You guys, this is our time, you said that. I got a copy of a letter.
I will pass this on to you afterwards.
You must be embarrassed of you two because I got a letter of them apologizing to us.
So I'm gonna reply to Judy Dowd just real quick. Judy, you said a lot of things that I can't reply to here. I'm happy to share my statement with you.
Why not?
So that, well, just because it would take the rest of the night for me to get into the details of what she said and what I
Well,
said.
I read your papers out on the internet, and I was appalled by how many misunderstandings.
So here's the thing, is as a historian, student of history at the time, what I can rely on is documentation. They do not say Abenaki, and so I do not say Abenaki. I did not see Abenaki.
I said they
I
did
understand
not
that
say
you have interpreted that
No,
to mean
they didn't say
Abenaki.
it.
But the people for whom it says Indian, we have also done the genealogies on, and they don't go back to Abenaki.
Well, I have also done the genealogies on them.
Well,
And my family, which
Share.
you commented on about disabilities,
Mhm.
my
I-
family is
yeah.
in there because we are told we had Huntington's chorea.
Yep.
Nobody in our family has Huntington's chorea.
Absolutely, you're
Nobody
right,
ever
you're right.
had
There was
Huntington's chorea.
misdiagnosis, that was a regular thing, 100%.
Exactly.
What I
And
said was, they had been diagnosed as
Why
disabled.
don't you let her
They
speak?
worked hard because I'm responding to her. Okay.
So these misunderstandings keep getting perpetuated by 5 or 9 people who call them hysteric call themselves historians. Mercedes calls herself historian. She has a BA. I have my master's.
I also have a
have
master's.
studied this for 50 fucking years. I've interviewed these people. I have lived with these people.
I am not denying that anyone was targeted by eugenics. Lots of people were. Your family was, Don's was, absolutely. My issue is that it doesn't mean you're Abenaki, that you were in the eugenics survey.
Yeah, but they're not the sole. They're not the sole authority. That's like saying Montreal is the sole authority on French Canadian. I think Quebec would have a problem with that.
Yeah.
There was hundreds of family bands that were throughout Vermont, New Hampshire, Canada. When you're saying it's pretty arrogant, and I'm not saying that you don't feel that you're the only authority. I give you that. I'm not. Wait a minute. I'm not taking that away from you because that's what you may feel. It's just not historically accurate. There are many tribes that were Abenaki, and that's paper right there. The Coassuck led a raid on Odanak, for God's sakes. They weren't part of Odanak. You were saying they weren't Indian? I'm just telling you the facts are, I'm not taking anything away from you that you might feel that you're the only authority, but that's just not historically accurate. So we're saying that don't take away our lived experience because you want to claim sole authority of it. Just like I said, Montreal is not the sole authority of French Canadian when Quebec would have a problem with you saying that. So I'm just putting it in context. So that's all I'm saying. And I'm not taking away what you may feel because you may feel that. But it may be just historically inaccurate. That's all I'm saying.
I will be facilitating this as a question and response. So I'm going to let Dr. Drew respond.
I would just urge those who want to have a second forum to keep your eye on the issue here. The issue is that the individuals in these groups do not have Abenaki ancestry. They have great stories.
Who determines
To
that?
say, because I've actually
That's not up to you to
I
say that.
actually did the genealogies of every single family that they claim in their own documentation. There's no Abenaki ancestors. That's it. That's the story. You had a flawed process that recognized people who have no Abenaki ancestry, and now you have individuals who are upset because of that, because there's a possibility that that truth will come out.
No.
But that was never part of the process. I have all of the documents. You can access them yourself. This is a serious problem that you've engaged in.
So we need another forum so we can prove you wrong. Geez, it'd be nice to be able to speak history league. Thank you.
We have to do our own.
You got 10
You guys
seconds.
don't have all the records. You're saying, look at the smart ass look that you give me, just turn your head like that. So you haven't got my family, you haven't researched it. How about St. Francis, when all the people went there? There was a lot of families born, Sorrel. It's like you never even looked at that.
I don't know what I looked at. I wrote a paper about it.
Yeah, but it's your opinion. It's all it is your
It's
opinion.
research based on facts.
We got
less than 25 minutes. We have less than 25 minutes.
Why didn't you have a comment? Why?
Well, I'm not a representative of UVM. I don't.
No, but they put you down as.
Yes, it should be on it. As a social worker.
I'm just saying,
Associate
even
person.
him, Maxwell should not be on there. Leadership here at Ottawa University.
You get 10 seconds.
I want to just reiterate that when we talk over one another, the folks who are watching on the streaming service are unable to follow the conversation. I know that there are a number of people who want to ask questions or provide comments. I'm trying to service those questions and comments, so let's do this one at a time. There may be a back and forth with the panel, but I want to ground us in procedure.
No, he tries to.
Nobody here who may be affiliated with UVM is currently representing the university.
No, but that's the way it was put in the paperwork, so it makes people think, oh, they're UVM scholars, they're UVM this and that. And they have him down as a professor, and he's an associate professor. So there's a difference.
I'm going to move on.
Can you answer the question or no?
And I think that's easy to part, all right?
Wait, can you answer the question?
Yeah.
Well, it should be. You're in our territory.
No, you are in our territory.
You are in our town.
evidence.
Right now.
Our capital.
Yeah.
You're not in clear.
Oh, we have evidence.
You're not here.
I will once again reiterate, and this is the last time I'm going to reiterate
Where
this,
is it?
You are.
that when we talk over one another,
In our territory.
the folks who are trying to follow along on the streaming service are unable to follow the conversation. If this erupts to talking over again, I'm going to stop the workshop.
I second that. Until everybody is represented equally.
My question to Ian is related about his credibility. Why was he asked to leave St. Mary's College? He didn't like her.
There's a hand over here, Troy.
This is also part of this conspiracy hearing. I resigned. I have a letter thanking me for my service 11 years from the president to take up another position at another university, which was actually a promotion. And somehow they have some idea that something happened and I was fired. That's not at all what happened. I moved with my family to a new city to get a promotion. This is the type of things that they try to do. Misinformation,
Really?
rumors,
Us people?
Hydro-Quebec. It doesn't end. I'm telling you, if you want to have another forum, you should really focus on the facts. These people do not have any Abenaki ancestry. And that's what should determine whether or not you recognize them.
You're a white man.
Thank you.
Yes.
Somebody said it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Brenda.
Welcome, honey.
No, you first.
We will need thank you. YFT we instead of these thousand day yeah, also on that key. I call it Red Fish Horseshoe down the river and what you know is Brattleboro. Traditionally known as Matastigok, but the one that's needs to 22. I am that place, and that place is me. I breathe that air, I drink that water. Some of my ancestors are from here, some of my ancestors are from far away. I am of mixed heritage, as are we all. And I claim them all. I want to honor my grandmothers and my grandfathers, wherever they are. I want to be here for the land, which does not have a voice. And that is what Indigenous people are defined as in the dictionary. People of the land, and the land is the people. My question here, and it's clear that everybody feels strongly, their viewpoint, their stories, they're all true. They're all subjective. We're human beings, and we have different realities. My question is, and I applaud the idea of a opportunity for other voices to be told in the State House, because that hasn't happened for 14 years. Excuse me, 12 years. That needs to happen. My question is, as former chair of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs, and I'll be passing the microphone to the current chair next to me here. The invitation was extended by Chief Rick O'Bonsawin at the Vermont Commission meeting a couple of years ago to come and talk about this in City Council. We have accepted that. We told Chief Rick that. It has not happened. Why are we talking past each other at decision makers and politicians instead of with each other? This is the traditional way. Why can we not sit in council and speak to each other? I'm looking at you, Mr.
I'm looking
Wetzel.
at you too.
I see you.
I'm right here.
Yeah.
I was here.
He won't be. I am related to you.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
Rich, you're not.
No, you changed your
My
name.
ancestors married into your father's family. I am related to you. I honor all of my grandparents. I offer that invitation again. Can we come together and sit in council as human beings? I am a human being, an alma mater. I am learning the language. I am honored to learn the language of this land. It is the language that this land speaks and knows for thousands of years. What do you need?
Thank you, Rich.
Your group was invited to come to Omaha as long as you brought your genealogical evidence with you. And that's why it never happened, because you did not bring, we invited you to Odenak, Chief Rick and everybody, and the council, And with the emphasis that you bring the genealogical evidence. And then you never showed up because you do not have it. That is the clear and precise
Do you have an email or a
evidence
letter on
that
that? Because I
presented
never
by
received
people
that.
who have credentials of PhDs.
May I ask my question?
Who have PhDs,
May I
right?
ask?
They have
Someone
very much
microphone right
credentials,
now.
and I am trying to speak and counter a point that they are making that is a lie.
No.
They were definitely invited, I will give you that.
I wanna
But you
see it.
did not show up
I wanna
with
see
the
an
facts
email
of
or a letter, 'cause
evidence,
I never
genealogical evidence. That was the premise, and nobody showed up from this side because there is
We never
none.
received it.
You did.
No.
I have a question for Mr. LaRue. Thank you. And my question is this.
Who are you, please?
I am Dan Kutzer. I am from Newport. I've grown up in Vermont. This is my root. My question for you, sir, kind of ties into very many of the assertions that we have heard tonight. Lots and lots of statements as if they were fact without data to back them up. So my question for you, Professor Russo, is what are your credentials as a genealogist?
So I've been studying genealogy for, I'd say about 12 years now. I first wrote a paper on specifically the history of French-Canadian genealogy and the sources that are used in French-Canadian genealogy, especially in relation to these two large projects that exist in Quebec. So there's one that I mentioned earlier, the University of Montreal. It's existed now for almost 60 years. That has digitized all those documents. I talked about 2 million of them, where I was able to trace the families that were listed in the petitions.
Are you a professional genealogist, sir?
I'm a professional historian and sociologist
So
who
then not
studies
a scholar.
genealogy and can very easily do genealogical research because it's what I research.
I see.
Professional genealogists don't have advanced degrees. That's not a qualification to be a professional genealogist. The issue here is that none of the people who are members of these groups have Abenaki ancestry, which is easy to verify if you know how to do genealogical research.
Sir,
I literally wrote a paper where I explain all of the methods that were used to do every single genealogy of the families that they claim were Abenaki in the 1800s. You can read that paper and do the research yourself. Even if you're not a professional genealogist, I just showed you where the website is with the data that's free. It's even in English. You could literally search the names like you would on Google and then go back to the 1600s and verify if they're Abenaki, and you'll find out that they're French people who came from France.
okay, this is yet another assertion on your part that doesn't hold water.
Okay.
Being able to prove indigenous ancestry is a specialty, and amateur genealogists cannot do it and do it correctly, and yet you sit here writing entire books claiming that you're some sort of expert because you have this advanced degree, and then
And I studied genealogy.
Yeah,
And I studied historical records.
that doesn't make you right.
But it doesn't make you right. Have you read the paper where I show you the sources of how I came up with this?
I must be missing something because I made no claim of anything that I could be either right or wrong on, but you have. You have missing information, sir.
I have a research paper that you can all read and find out exactly how I did that research. It's very transparent. It literally has pages and pages of appendices for that reason. So you can, I'm more than happy to have a discussion once you actually read that. I presented one family today. I actually did research on the 20 that they claim were Abenaki and are not.
Did you get informed consent?
He's not a professional
Public records.
He's not a professional
It's a
genealogist.
public record.
You're required to do informed consent.
These are public
He
records.
isn't.
Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Giovanna Peebles. I live in Montpelier, and I was the Vermont State Archaeologist from 1976 to 2014. That's 38 years. And I have lived experience with the Vermont Abenaki. I had many friends, acquaintances in the Vermont Abenakis, and I had friends and acquaintances in the Odanak Abenaki. Chief Walter Watsow had supper at my home one night, on a farmer's night in 1994, that I invited Chief Walter Watsow and Homer St. Francis. And Homer welcomed everyone, and Walter gave us a prayer for the evening. And Bill Haviland did an overview of the Vermont Abenaki. I'm an archaeologist because most history was never written. Most people did not write. History was written by the elites. It was written by people who could write and usually wrote about themselves. I think one of the underlying foundation issues here, and I hear the word evidence quite a lot today. We need to see more evidence, and I heard that from the legislators. Well, in my almost 40 years as state archaeologist, and then since then, I've been retired for 10 years, and I've been doing a lot of work since then. Evidence isn't always available. Evidence doesn't exist for so much of our history. Going back to why we have archaeologists, first of all. Evidence is really hard. History is messy. Human relationships are messy. So I have read your paper, Daryl, very closely, and I have like 97 yellow stickies all over that paper. And I appreciate all the work you did. But the thing that grieved me the most is that you found all this documentation about French-Canadian families, and it went to 1830, but how about all the documentation that just simply doesn't exist?
It went to the 1600s, all of it. All the French Canadian
But your paper, I understand that, I was just looking at, I'm thinking about your chart. You have a chart where...
That's just the census records. That's a different form of evidence.
Okay.
Yeah. It is an evidence.
My bottom line point, and I will shut up now, is that evidence is very hard to come by, especially in the economy. My grandchildren have never seen a typewriter, and I wrote my master's thesis and many papers and books on typewriters, and my little grandchildren have never seen one. Memory is very short. Historians know that. Anthropologists know that. And I want everyone in this room to know that memory is just fallible. And all of us as anthropologists know the importance of oral tradition, oral histories. That is an underpinning of so much of our work, and it cannot be just thrown out the window. I understand Odanak Abenaki saying, I don't know you, you're not my cousin, you're not my auntie. I understand that. But this is a whole other experience, this is a whole other lived situation, and it's so much more complicated than we are giving credit. Thank you.
This woman has been waiting for 40 minutes with her hand up, very patiently. Could you please give her the mic?
Thank you. I'm going to bring this to our last comment / question and close and bring us to closure after that.
Thank you. First, William E., everyone from Odanak for being here. I am Abenaki. I have always known, I was raised with prayers, I was raised with tradition, culture. My family spent time at Thompson's Point with the Algonquins. My father helped take care of an elder Algonquin. I count that I have friends at Odanak. I had a great aunt who lived there until she passed away in the 70s. We went back and forth from Vermont to Odanak as I was growing up. In fact, I was visiting Odanak when she was off the reservation. earning his many dollars. I am not here to speculate as to who is or is not an SE here in Vermont. I am not here to speculate as to who has ties to energy. There has been in the news that both Odanak and Olanak signed treaties with the oil companies, and that there's a plan for part of the pipeline to come through Vermont into New Hampshire. Whether that's accurate, that's what's been on the internet. That's all I'm relying on. I have been doing my genealogy research. Mr. LaRue, I am not a licensed genealogist, and that is to this person's question, for their question. I have spent almost 5 years searching my own genealogy. I have had people after 20 minutes say, you're not Abenaki, and yet when I'm looking, because I don't want to, I have grown up with traditions and being told that I'm Abenaki, and hearing the language, and learning the traditions, the dance, the culture. And for me, this is very hurtful, because I do. Jacques, I am hoping I am still welcome to go for the powwow. This for me is for me personally hurtful, because I want you to be friends. And I have friends here in Vermont, and I'm not being very articulate here at this moment, so I apologize for that. I would actually like to sit down with someone who I trust without a vested interest to look in Mr. LaRue. I feel like your demeanor right now is being disrespectful to me, and I have stood here being respectful to everyone who has been presenting. Thank you. I would welcome sitting down with someone to truly look at my information to make sure that I am correct. I do not want to be a Canadian. And yet, how can I have been raised as an Abenaki with tradition? No one told me that I have a 12th generation ancestor and I'm suddenly Abenaki.
Okay, I'm going to bring us to closure, and I know there are comments left unsaid, I know there are questions left unasked.
We have one more over here.
I'm going to bring us to closure now, so that we can move on with our
I have sat here for the last 2.5 hours.
I appreciate that.
I've worked for over 45 years with who these folks are saying are these wannabes, these pretending. Do I have the right to just say something, or that wouldn't be appropriate? I've worked for the legislature.
I'm going to leave this as the final question.
So let's start talking in terms of scholarship, because that's been a really important thing. Let me start, John. A couple of years ago, you said that we were asked about the reception you got at UVM, and you said it was a very warm one. John, outside of UVM, outside the University of Vermont, in the Northeast, what kind of reception have you gotten from other institutions outside of UVM? Have you had good input from other places that have been welcoming you? Other colleges that have been welcoming you?
The University of Montreal has asked me recently. I do conferences for the University of Montreal.
In the United States. In the United States. We're not talking about Canada. The United States. What other places?
What other places I went? I went all over Quebec, you know.
I know.
What I think you guys say French, Canadian, Indian, but I go do different schools within the territory of Quebec and Ontario. I came to UVM once, twice, I spoke once.
If Professor Nazar did not take to what you had to offer, would there be anything we could discuss in there if you didn't have an advocate, a sponsor, so to speak, and the good professor over here? Where would your argument be in the United States? John, where would it be in the United States? Where's your argument in the United States in terms of anyone outside of David Mack?
I had my argument for the last 25 years.
In the United States.
I met this man only 3 years ago, and you know, I'm advocating for this for the the last, since 2003. So I didn't know this man over here before 6 years ago. And when he came to the same conclusion as me. And you know, you were good friends with my uncle, and my uncle, before he passed there, I would meet him every single day, and that's how we live on the rest, and that's how we communicate among each other. But I did not go to other university or not CJUP, but colleges within or institution within the boundaries of the United States. But I did go to universities within the province of Quebec and other.
But nothing else in the university. You know, Mr. Troy, legislator.
I'm going to bring us to a close now.
I just want to say something to you. Do you understand that for these people here, a lot of them, they're academics. This is something that's an intellectual exercise. For these people, this is who they are. This is no, you don't understand, because you've never been up there. Which of the tribes have you ever visited?
I'm not going to play the quiz game.
Because you have, okay. But let me ask.
Thank you so much for everybody for your participation, your questions, your comments. I know that a lot of them are left unsaid.
Make Canada the 51st state. Take it back.